Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. We're going to have a great time because we have a great person to have that time with. The conversation we're having today is part of a longer project. You can see the advertising for it up there. It's called Creativity and Collaboration in the Academy. And it's a project that's under the leadership of the Vice President of USC for Research. And the challenge is, how does USC maintain and increase its edge in research, especially in a time when collaboration, interdisciplinarity seems to be essential to everything? How is it that gets encouraged? What are the barriers between us and that? So we've been doing workshops and conferences and talks. And today it's a special pleasure for me to have this really delicious opportunity to talk about it with somebody whose name is associated with the idea of collaboration and leadership. He is, his titles, he is a USC University professor. He is a distinguished professor of management and organization. The list of articles and books he's written are a mile long. He is a beloved teacher. I know a bunch of your students are here today. He essentially created the field of leadership studies. In Japan, they have a category called Living National Treasure. And I believe that that is the title which I would like to afford him. And I'm also happy to say that we've been friends for more than 30 years. Please welcome Warren Bennis. So as you were sitting down, there was some music, if you noticed. It's not often that we have music at the beginning of events. This is a song that Warren asked that we play, and so I'd like to start by asking you to, how come? What is it?
Well, many of you may know the work of Stephen Sondheim. I'm a groupie. If there's anyone I would, do anything to meet, I once wrote him a crush letter. He never responded. He's brilliant in his lyrics, in his music. It was from a play, Into the Woods, which is a takeoff on, and the song that Martin Kaplan, my buddy, put on is It Takes Two. And that was the tune. It takes two, da-da-da. I won't try it. Marty said, please, Warren, do not try to sing it. But the last verse, I will just give you the words because it's so fundamental to the idea of collaboration, partnership, of any kind. It just goes like this, Marty. Marty told me, don't read anything else, don't prepare. I said, okay. So just read the first and last chapters of that book. So, but the last one goes, it takes trust, it takes just a bit, I'm sorry. It takes trust, it takes just a bit more, and we've done, we want 4, we've had none, we've got 3, we need 1, it takes 2. That's the last verse of that long, long riff. But my son, who's now doing some work in Prague with a firm, and their logo is "Working Alone Sucks." So let's start. One more thing. I just want to, looking around, I get so many memories. My oldest couple friend, and when I came to Cincinnati, to USC, Cincinnati, what a slip, to USC, I came from Cincinnati. We're sitting here, Jane and Mark Pisano, and next to them are also very old friends. I won't go through everyone here, but Jed Dannenbaum and Doe Mayer. And over coming up on the elevator with me was one of my first students. And I looked at him today and said, oh my God, you're a grown-up now. He is. He's an executive at Medtronic. I see most of all students and friends. Well, friends who come, colleagues who come, thank you. That really moves me. Thank you for coming, all of you.
everyone is happy to be here and to celebrate you and to continue to learn from you. I'm going to be quoting today from some of Warren's work. If you don't know The Essential Bennis, it's a great anthology, and it also includes at least one chapter from a book which was published as Organizing Genius, The Secrets of Creative Collaboration, although the original title was Great Groups. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to be quoting from some of this stuff as a way of raising some mileposts in your looking at these questions. So, but I'll start not from this book, but from an essay you wrote called The End of Leadership. You wrote, "Today's post-bureaucratic organizations are evolving into federations, networks, clusters, cross-functional teams, temporary systems, ad hoc task forces, lattices, modules, matrices, almost anything but pyramids with their obsolete top-down leadership." So how come?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you started with that because it reveals my optimism in general. Alas, bureaucracy still exists. I think, though, there's been a sort of a very gradual movement toward a bit more of connectivity, and at least the conventional wisdom among really the brightest, most exemplary leaders I know is they're trying to get that connectivity, trying to get that without having, even the fabled Jack Welch was talking about having only 9 rather than the 13 levels at GE when he took it over. So there's been a general tendency, at least, to talk the language of this, and often it's still the same old Weberian, Max Weber's bureaucracy, which, I wrote an article at least 60 years ago called The End of Bureaucracy. Well, it is not. It still has, I think it's moving, even the intellectual acceptance of this is the thing to do, Marty. Having executives write books, and they really live, they're serious about it. Bill George, for one, and many others. I say Bill George because I know my former student is an executive with Medtronic, which Bill George used to. So, at USC, for example, when I first looked at that title, Creativity and Collaboration in the Academy, I want to say that's an interesting oxymoron, because I do not think we have the kind of collegiality which is the foundation. The very word colleague. I mean, I remember a long time ago someone said, it was actually a Hollywood guy, director, or producer. He said, "I would love to be called a colleague. What does that mean?" So, yes, we talk about collegiality, but then I think about, okay, where my office is now, it's a row of offices. It's easy just to, it could be so easy if structurally we would at least look at the empty offices or the doors even. But why do we tables set up at any club you go to, any restaurant? They don't really consider the ecology of relationships. And that's why I think of all the institutions I've had anything to do with and studied, universities may rank very high in being the most siloized institution around, and yet I know that what you're doing with is important to do. It's important to get into the language, but we have a long way to go. We're in no position to boast about our own collaborative. I hope someone, I'm looking at some faculty members too, but an ex-dean says, an ex-VP as a matter of fact. I'd love you, we're not going to have questions now.
We're going to have a chance afterward. There's going to be a reception, and so we can get into a bunch of the stuff. But
okay.
At another point in that essay, you say most non-trivial problems require collective solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I believe that more now than when I wrote it. I forget when the essay was written, but it doesn't matter. Even more so today. In the book that you were taking some of these questions from, let's take the Manhattan Project, which created the first nuclear device. Now, why I raise that is one of my favorite chapters in the book. But here they were, 1943 January. J. Robert Oppenheimer, because he had a good network, he knew who he ought to get, including people like Dick Feynman. I mean, there were more Nobel, under 30, future Nobel laureates working on the Manhattan Project at that time. And yet, what were they involved in? Now, just for historical reasons, a year before, Adolf Hitler called a meeting of all the Gauleiters that were under the control of Nazi Germany. It's a period of time which I lived through, and they were from all the Poland and Czechoslovakia, all France. They were all there. What was their goal? They met for 80 minutes. They met, ironically, at a beautiful conference center. If you've ever been to Berlin, you may have seen the Wannsee Center, which is now devoted to pictures of the Holocaust. In 80 minutes, Heydrich, one of the Gauleiters, the chairman of the group, it was like a business meeting, no kidding. And they raised the question of how do we get rid of 6 million Jews? And it took them 80 minutes to implement the Holocaust, the death camps. No kidding. A year later, J. Robert Oppenheimer in our democracy were producing a nuclear device. And by the way, one other thought which I just reread, because you said only reread the first and last chapter. I've not read it, honestly, since it's been out. And in that...
When he reread it, he told me, it's good.
Yeah, well, I was, yeah. So there's a quote in there that Oppenheimer, think of Google now. And put Google in part of your mind. The open atmosphere, the free lunches, people having a day every week to do what they want to do. Okay. J. Robert Oppenheimer said to Heisenberg, "Oh, you're interested in doing that? Why not? Get the moral, ethical issues also of that." Bringing together the Wannsee Conference, 1942, January. The Los Alamos first meeting was January. A year later, one's making an atom bomb, the other is exterminating as many, not just Jews, gays, really devout Catholics were also in the crowd. That were okay. But when you think now, aside from the moral, ethical issues, because Dick Feynman said, after it was over, now we're all sons of bitches. When they saw the first test bomb go off, I forget what the name of it was, it's in the book.
Fat Boy. Oh,
yeah, the one in July before the August 6th, Hiroshima. It's hard to now remove your mind of the values here, but they needed, they couldn't do that thing without chemists, engineers. Go
ahead, chemists.
They must have had, I don't know how many different disciplines. Talk about interdisciplinarity on the Manhattan Project. Many future Nobel laureates, but at the end of that project, people like Bob Wilson, physicists from Princeton and others, wondered, what have we done? Because when you're in a great group, the one I wanted to call this one, when you're in a great group, you are so devoted to the task. You are so, in fact, it ends on because I reread that last chapter, Marty, it ends with a most problematical sentence. And I looked at it and said, I hope Marty doesn't ask me that. Now you are, I know. But I don't want, it's just tough. Great groups get so consumed. I don't know how many of you have ever been in one, but boy, when you're in it, it's a hot group, and your mind, and in fact, at the Park Project, which is a chapter there, they also took out alimony insurance for the people because they know that most of them are going to end up getting divorced. Not most, but they knew a percentage. So when you're in that kind of a group, preparing for a political campaign, Marty, you've been involved in that. Preparing for you're a theater group, you're making a weapon which will probably stop the Nazis. You only think of that. You're that much involved. Now, I don't know, there's a point at which collaboration goes over the edge, just like ambition can go over the edge. And I've not thought through enough. So at what point does a hot group lose reason? And anyway.
if most non-trivial problems require collective solutions, there are some barriers to achieving that you touch on, and I wanted to mention some of them. So you say, we resist the idea of collective creativity. We cling to the myth of the Lone Ranger, the romantic idea that great things are usually accomplished by a larger-than-life leader working alone.
Boy, am I glad you raised that. We all think of, when you think of Cubism, I'm not going to tell you what you think, but I'll tell you what I think you think, because I never know. As one of my mentors said, you never know what you said until you heard. You never know what you said until you hear the response to it. So what am I telling you what you're going to think? But I suspect if you think of Cubism, you'll think of Picasso. I suspect that when we think of great inventions, who is it recently? Who died? Steve Jobs. Did we forget who he co-founded it with? By the way, Marty did not mention this book. As I read over today, I said, boy, when I said that's good, it's a co-authored book. We still, and I think it was important to say that. I wish Pat were here, Pat Biederman, who deserves a lot of credit for that. But what I'm getting at is, especially maybe in U.S. American society, based on the idea of the individual, based on the pursuit of happiness, liberty, life, and pursuit of happiness. If you're from Canada, it's close, but they don't talk about, it's much more limited. But
and out of that comes our Lone Ranger complex?
Who do we think of? When I was a kid and went to the movies, it was John Wayne. He had a 2-word mission statement. Saddle up. Now, I mean, there's something about that that still is appealing. It's an encompassing and I think somewhat dangerous tendency to remember that who cooked the dinner for Julius Caesar? That was I think it's in a book somewhere. And he mentions all these other things that you couldn't do by yourself. When we think of the Sistine Chapel, you think who? Michelangelo, right? Yeah, like the rest of us. There were 13 assistants and 200 people working on it. But when we think of Sistine Chapel, we think of Charlton Heston standing on a scaffolding doing it all by himself, right? And there's something really heroic about that. But just think that maybe among the top 3 best-selling magazines in this country, Marty, is People. People. So I'm talking about the peopleification. I'm talking about, imagine a magazine which was called System as being a best-selling magazine. Group. It's not sexy. And somehow or another, the reality is not sexy. The reality is working with others. The reality is knowing you cannot do this without someone else helping you. I cannot teach the course and I see some of our students here, I cannot teach the course we're teaching, Dr. Sample and I, without him. And I know he knows he can't do without me. That means I don't have everything my own way. He has to abdicate. No, let me put it this way. To teach the course with Dr. Sample, with anyone teaching with you, I'd have to abdicate everything I'd want to do for whatever my ego requires. And because if I'm going to sustain this relationship, I think the same thing. By the way, it sounds like not close to creativity and collaboration in the academy. I'm talking about relationships of all kinds. I'm talking about couple relationships. I'm talking about partners. I'm talking about roommates. I think what I've just said holds. And also that word used, it takes trust. That's probably the foundation. And then the second thing is, I cannot do that course without Dr. Sample. We both know that, even though we're wildly different in many ways. And we also don't do the things that if we taught the course alone, we would do differently. But that's what it takes. I mean, and even Sondheim, brilliant as a lyricist, I think he's done most of his work, like Into the Woods, where It Takes Two comes from. The librettist for that was James Lapine, a friend. And I think he's written with someone most of the time. Takes two.
When you write about the reasons that we cling to the Lone Ranger mythology, you say this: despite the rhetoric of collaboration, we continue to live in a byline culture where recognition and status are conferred on individuals, not teams of people who make change possible.
Okay. Is there anyone in the crowd, raise their hand please, who sits on a tenure committee?
Who will admit it?
Yeah, okay, yeah, I know, never mind. I have myself, and I often wondered about this, because in some way, I don't know, when I was a university president, I could never say I have my questions about tenure, but that's not the point I'm going to do. What do we do when we evaluate candidates for tenure? Who is the first author? That counts. Or if you're, if you're a second and third author, it's another category. It doesn't count as much. Why do we do? Okay, look at whom we remember as writing op-ed columns, and notice how more the news stories do have several, but always leading with the person we're familiar with. But even in the op-ed columns, we still see Tom Friedman. I'm thinking about the Times. We see my favorite, Christoph. Always, it's always a byline. We still cater, bow to, over-evaluate, because somehow we leave out George Braque, whom I didn't mention earlier, with Picasso, worked 7 years together to create Cubism, not just Picasso. But why do we, I don't know the answer. Why is it we don't pay attention to the duo?
And how is it that in these groups, people relinquished their devotion to getting credit and getting a byline?
Because they felt they were going to change the world. They really felt that for whatever reason. Well, first of all, it brings up an important point. You see, this is close to home. USC is now embarked on interdisciplinary, polysyllabic word which I stumble over, and I've been pushing it for years when I was a university administrator. Interdisciplinarity. And we're doing our best. If you look at our incoming faculty, more and more, they're writing the hyphen. I'm thinking about a colleague, Michael Wartelman, who is a computational biologist. More and more were hyphenated. That's what I meant by writing the hyphen. Marty should be called professor of cellular biology and comp lit. No kidding. His degree was AB, Harvard. I'm sorry, Marty, I got to do this. Molecular biology, right?
Molecular biology.
And Stanford, Ph.D. Yeah, in
modern thought and literature.
Modern thought and literature. Okay, there you go. More and more of us try to embody, but basically, when President Nikias and also former President Semple, they both pushing in this direction, and I agree. Dr. Nikias and Provost Garrett are talking about hiring transformational faculty. I'm sort of ambivalent about that.
As a term or a goal?
Because because I wonder how it makes people who are already here wonder if they're transformational.
They're pre-transformational.
Am I transformational or not? I don't know. But it has the problem of people poking fun of it. I agree with what they're after, honestly. However, I don't think we should just go after the superstars, because I would make part of the meaning of the people we should be recruiting as not only are they just very, very, very good and the best we could find, but that they are also enjoying working with others. I don't want to hire a bunch of lone geniuses. Like, let me give you the example. At Berkeley, they have a parking lot for Nobel laureates. You know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Parking lot. Yeah. Now, the problem
they don't get a restroom.
A friend of mine recently, sorry?
They don't get a restroom, do they, too?
I don't know, maybe. I have no idea, but the parking lot is more important.
It's true.
Than the university.
It's true.
Than the restroom. But, okay, so I had a friend visiting recently who was with parents and their child, this was 5 years ago, who told me about this. that they were reviewing all sorts of, they're from Boston, Cambridge, and they were thinking about going to the Ivies. Well, they decided to come to the final two choices were I say Berkeley, didn't I? Yeah, Berkeley, USC. And when I went to Berkeley, they were very impressed meeting individuals, but you know what? The parking lot for Nobel laureates was empty. What does that say? They're not teaching. They're not here. We want people who are not just terrific, but who really want to work with others. That's transformational, not just, all that. I hope I'm clear about that. I hope the word includes that also. Not just being brilliant, but being collaborative.
The Lone Ranger is dead,
I
you
would,
wrote.
No.
Is that wishful thinking?
Yeah. I think for example, it's wishful thinking. Well, the reality is it's dead because there are people that, when we had to our class, we have guest speakers. This is a good way of putting it. Oh gosh, you got to help me with this. Somebody help me with this. What's Zemeckis' first name, Chris?
Robert.
Thank you. Good. Whoa, good. Okay, Robert, he was visiting, and the first time he came was several years ago. He comes every year, really, and he's not a very charismatic, inspiring, but he says very things like a question came up. This guy, produced, directed some of the names. Forrest Gump, just to begin with, and a lot of other movies. There's a whole series of things. Very famous, important Academy Award winner, and someone asked him, some student asked him, "What is your favorite movie?" Well, his answer was marvelous. He said, "Forrest Gump." Well, that's not the good part of it. And the student who asked the question said, "Well, why Forrest Gump? Aside from its sales and all that." He said, "Because we were all making the same movie." And the student came back again. What do you mean? The student was stupefied by that we were all making the same movie. What? Of course you were. What do you mean, Mr. Zemeckis? And Bob Zemeckis replied, "Oh, what I mean is, when I said we were all making the same movie, what I was thinking about were the caterers, the lighting people, the dolly grips, and he listed 20 different people into making Forrest Gump. And if you after that I went to a movie studio and saw how many people were involved in it. And you still, but is there an Academy Award other than the technical area? For ensemble? I mean, if you've seen, as I hope you all will, if you haven't already, Margin Call, there was some great ensembles between Jonah Hill and Billy B. What's his name? This leading actor.
Kevin Spacey?
No, that's another. Wait a minute, I'm getting my movies. No, I'm thinking about Moneyball.
Oh, Moneyball.
I did say Margin Call.
Yes.
And in both movies, but I'm really thinking about Moneyball. It was the scenes between the lead actor,
Brad Pitt.
Yes, and thank you. Shows you my knowledge of famous stars. It was Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill. I never heard of Jonah Hill, but their duets together, their ensemble work, when Brad Pitt was explaining to Jonah how you fire people, and they went back and forth. It reminds me of conversations that I asked people about. How do you do that? Do we ever have an Academy Award for ensemble acting? No. We have supporting and leading. That's an example of the enshrinement still. And I think what's wrong about it is that Jonah Hill made Brad Pitt as good as he could be, and Brad Pitt made Jonah Hill as good, and I'd never seen Jonah Hill before. My son tells me, whom I went to see it with, that, oh yeah, he's on a lot of, I just don't watch TV that much. But why not? See, that's the question. Is it, no, John Wayne's still alive in the minds of a lot of us, but I still think, without our realizing, for some reason there's a cultural blindness, I think, Marty, about the idea of teamwork, about the idea of two people doing something, because I wish I knew more about neurosciences and the brain, because I think it's related somehow to defining things in terms of the individual body, and we don't think of, I think of a couple also, a lot of the times, as a couple, not just as two individuals. I think of Doe, still, when I'm looking at two couples before, I think of them, they're all very, very different people. I'm not even going to argue with them about that. But I also think of them as a couple.
Mm-hmm.
They're the Pisanos. I'm sorry, Mark. And they're, well, I don't have a name for a common name for you guys. Well, you're still in the new age, living with your own names. So I think of Doe Mayer and Jed Dannenbaum. That's not, but I think of them as a couple also. And when I'm with one or the other, I think of them also as an individual, but I also think of them as a reality, not a nominal thing, but a thing. You see, you can't, when I say a couple, you can't think of mentally what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that relationship is as real as Doe and Jed would be individually.
Well, let's expand beyond two to a group. There are some paradoxes in creative collaboration. I just wanted to mention a few that you mentioned to talk about them. One of them, you said, every great group has a strong leader. Mm-hmm. How can that be? How can a non-hierarchical organization have a head?
It beats me. I'm glad you raised it, because I thought a lot about that with respect to Steve Jobs. Despite the fact that he started the company with, wasn't he? Sorry, but even then I'm sure, yeah. But here's a guy who did lead what may be today the world's wealthiest company. Now, I just saw that in the news yesterday. I wondered if that's really true. I think if it's not exactly true, it's very close to the top. But here's a guy who has not created, on the face of it, the culture of listening, the culture of germinating, and he's, in a way, the good example. He embodies the paradox. How come? And then you wonder, what I mentioned spit over the words about Max Weber, who really was the first person back in the early part of the last century who theorized about bureaucracy. He didn't invent it, it was there, but he made it into a theory or a concept. It's a puzzle that, to me, that, and because a leader like Steve Jobs does not, in fact, in many ways he's contrary, Marty, to all the exemplary leaders I've written about who were collaborative. Most of the time, so then I think of some great chefs who are just really difficult to work for, or Steve Jobs, really difficult to work for. And yet somehow I think the paradox could be close to resolve, Marty, because you know, to use Jobs' two phrases, we're doing something not just great, but insanely great. You all heard that, right? And he said, what else?
Think different?
Yeah, think different, but also I love one quote in the book where, here's the question going around an apple, and it's a beautiful one. I laughed a lot. How many Apple workers does it take to change a bulb? How many Apple workers is the question? This was asked at Apple back in the 90s. How many Apple staffers or workers does it take to answer? 1. The other 5 are designing a new and more beautiful light bulb. The other 5. So it was, in a way, an inventive culture, I guess. So that, in a way, something that is really going to make a difference in the world, you're working for that asshole. I just deleted the last syllable. But you're working for someone really difficult. And yet, his modeling may have created that reason for that joke. 5 others are designing the aesthetics for a much better life.
On that vein, you wrote, being an amiable person, or even a pleasant one, isn't a perquisite for membership in a great group. Ordinary affability may be no virtue. Mm-hmm. Richard Feynman was infamous for telling his colleagues that one or another of their ideas was stupid. And in the Steve Jobs obituaries, what he told his people, stupid would be kind.
Yep. You know, again, you can't see it in the back row, but I am shrugging my shoulders with a paradox. It's really a remarkably good question. It is a paradox. I tried to answer it, but I'm not happy. Feebly, I thought, when I used, well, we're part of a team. Well, it's partly resolves it, not fully. We're working. He is difficult. We're not even going to discuss him anymore. But by God, we're going to do something together that's going to make a difference. Maybe that is what it is, Marty. That would still create that kind of a culture. Now, the question I didn't get to, but Max Weber talked about the routinization of charisma. The routinization of charisma was another really tough issue. That's his phrase, Weber. And you wonder, would you invest in Apple today as you might have done before? Has the stock price fallen down? I just don't know. Probably, I would guess when any really achieving CEO retires or someone passes, I think the stock price typically goes down, and but where will it go is the question. To what extent does that which Jobs stood for, the aesthetics, the drive, not allowing imperfection of any kind, will that be instilled in the culture?
Another paradox, you described group leaders as pragmatic dreamers of greatness. Pragmatic dreamers.
Nice, actually, true. I think the dream is important. I think the dream is important. Pragmatic means, you know what? I'm going to set a deadline. You know what? The dream has to have a product, not just the dream you had last night. Get something out the door, said Steve Jobs. Also Henry Ford, by the way. Get product out the door. Then we'll. And a quick anecdote. When I was at MIT, doing my doctoral work, and then when I was a professor there, sometime in the early 60s, there were 3 or 4 of us who really wanted to collaborate, Marty, and every Friday we would get together at the MIT Faculty Club and have lunch. It was marvelous, overlooking the Charles River. We're having such an engaging conversation. 4 of us, really interesting people, all interested in the same things, organizations, leadership, change, etc. We're going to do something together. We met for an entire year having lunch. It was all talk. And when we began meeting again early in the next semester, in the fall, one of the 4 of us said, why don't we do something together? I went, yeah, why don't we teach a course together? And someone else said, why don't we do a book together? And we did. We worked about a year and a half doing a book together, and then we could hold it up. This is a tangible thing called a book. And I don't think we felt like we were collaborating until we start writing this, thing you could touch. That's
when you became pragmatic
I
dreamers.
felt that's when we became a collaborative group. And was there a leader? Well, it's a little bit away from that question about, I think in that group, it was a shared leadership. Ed Schein and I were the senior with tenure people and 2 assistant professors who so it was Bennis, Schein, Berlew, Steele, as our students call it, BS squared.
Another paradox in similar area, you said that people in great groups are often young people with delusional confidence.
Yeah, I think young is the first one I like, because it leads to diversity. And that's the issue that I have to mention. Because when you think about the Manhattan Project, or you think about the Park Group, which invented the first real desktop and lab computer, Steve Jobs stole it, right? When you think of any really group, whether it's the group that founded our Constitution, think of that as a group, my God. Think of how diverse that group was. Other than people of color. Now, even today, I think we have a long way to go in this issue of diversity. And I'm not just talking about people of color. I'm not just talking about ethnicity or religion. I'm talking about being really different. And when you're really in a great group, it's that kind of built-in oh, you notice that he may be a little nuts, but you gotta listen to it. You gotta, you know, and you treasure it, and you know that. And there are examples in that book about a guy who's now in a faculty, Murray Gelman, and talking about the group at the radiation lab at MIT, and someone who were trying to solve a tough problem. Get this is MIT during the war years, where Murray was working, and they were trying to figure out a really difficult equation. Some guy, as Murray described, Murray Gelman, Gell-MANN, he's a Nobel laureate, joined our faculty 2 years ago. Okay, so as Gelman describes it, they're working with all these bright, brilliant, young mathematicians, physicists. Some guy looks like a stranger, like dressed like you might imagine a homeless person looks. You know, dressed like an unmade bed comes in the room, and he joins the conversation. They don't know who he is, really. Some of them don't know who he is. And he, in a foreign accent, said, well, the answer to that is tree, meaning three. And everyone said, yeah. So regardless of where it's coming from in great groups, you just eat up good ideas. This is an extreme example. This is someone who really wasn't part, who just walked in like off the street. But in good groups, you care about the solution. That's pragmatic dreamer again. You really want to.
You said that people in great groups are irrationally optimistic.
Yeah, how could you not be? Yeah, I think that's really. I mean, just put yourself in the mind of Jobs back in '71, let's say. I mean, you think that you're going to. Let's talk about connectivity again. You think you're going to make it. See, because this is an idea that's not in the book, but what I thought about recently, Marty. I think innovations of our time are not a new gadget. You might think so, well, it's the new iPhone or the new Android or whatever it is, or the new hybrid. No. The innovations of this century have been and will continue to be that which takes an experience and makes it better and quicker. Why did Sky Dayton invent Earthlink? Because he was having such a difficult time getting on the internet. Why? You see, and I want to just repeat that. Innovations of the ones we regard highly important now, well, think of the new iPhone 4 or whatever. Think of, because what? Even though we can be so hooked that we're not going to have relationships, but think of the idea of making us connected with very little expense. You don't have to go fly in a two or engine airplane to get from, when I was growing up, to get from New York to LA. Let's not talk about speedier jet. I'm talking about the capacity. When I was overseas in World War II, after the war was over, there, calling, or even when I got home, making a long-distance call was a pain in the neck. You had to get an operator on it. She had to call this, or he had to. Think of what that does when we get a human connection at that. So you've got to be a little. I think you really have to have the almost hubris to think you're going to invent something that will change the way people relate to one another, and that's what Jobs did.
You mentioned, excuse me, a little while ago, the university. And so I want to turn to that just for a bit, thinking of the university as a kind of creative ecosystem. And you write about leaders of great groups. They tend to be deep generalists, not narrow specialists. They're not so immersed in one discipline that they don't see solutions in another. They're problem solvers before they're computer scientists or animators.
Boy, yeah, I would underline that even more now. I would highlight that even more. I would highlight the fact that it's important to really have a discipline, a kind of a spine of a discipline. But when Plato talked about philosophers, he really talked about them as being putting things together. Putting it together, that song again, takes two. Okay, but it, yeah, I think it's important that I was trained at MIT with a Ph.D. in economics. And I had some spine of analysis, of understanding what they meant about an elegant theory. I could talk. I learned, it was not my natural bent, as you know, Marty. I had to become, it made me aware of the need for being disciplined in my thinking, now, or in my writing. Marty and I discussed this before the interview. Marty is aware, and notice how he has we sort of agreed that I will probably be discursion. I'm a very discursive thinker, and I need Marty to stop me from going on and not connecting the dots, to make it a point. So I tend to think circularly, which I know drives some of my students sitting here a little bit nuts because they don't know where or when I'm going to, end off. But I think that in one way that serves me well, but I need a PowerPoint to keep me structured. I need Marty now to not allow me to go on and get away from your message.
And you think of academic disciplines as providing that spine?
I think, yes. I think it served me well, but not enough. It's I don't think I would be a university professor. By the way, that's the title that Marty used earlier. And I remember telling my mother years ago when I said, "Mom, I just got to be a university professor," and she said, "Haven't you always been one?" It doesn't really mean very much because I have been one, but that group is picked because they're supposedly distinguished in their discipline, but transcend and break boundaries. If you just think of someone like Leo Brody, who's trained as an English prof at Yale, but basically or Marshall McLuhan, they're both of them as much poets as quants. They're as much English. They know that very well, but they've gone way beyond. And Marty, I don't think I've ever told you this, but I may have. If I have, it's okay to repeat. Okay, I was very interested in mastery. What goes into making a person a master? Really a master, not just a damn competent, good journeyman. It's a word not used today. It's very gender related. Not just a damn good, but a master. And I began interviewing people whom I thought were masters. Architects, Frank Gehry was one. I never completed the book or the essay even. But the one I'm thinking about now is Yo-Yo Ma. Are there any musicians in the crowd here? There must be one or two. Any Thornton School? Oh, great. What's Thornton School? Thornton School, yes. What's your instrument? Trumpet. My goodness. Jazz. Yeah. Where do you want to play? In a symphony orchestra or a... Where does a trumpeter go these days?
If he or she is good, wherever they want to go. But it's more difficult in the whole central because it's a much more stringent, difficult.
But you know how difficult it is, and yet you must love it a lot.
So what did you learn about mastery?
What I learned, well, let me tell you about my yo-yo. Thank you, Marty. See what he did just now? For God's sake, Swan, get back to the point. Okay, I'm sorry. We could go on for a long time. So I asked Yo-Yo Ma what goes into making a master. He said, well, first, he said really puzzling things to me. He said, first, you got to know the scales. That's what I meant by disciplinarity. That discipline, that spine, okay. You got to know the scales. Two, and his second and third, I said in three reasons. What makes a master? So that was the first. You really got to know the discipline, the drill. Second, you got to learn to connect quickly with others. And he went on, and third, then you give it away. Now I sort of got, but the second stumped me. Learn how to connect with others quickly. And I said, you know, with all due respect, I didn't know what to call him, Mr. Ma or Yo-Yo. I didn't know him that well, but I just didn't bother. I didn't use the name actually. He said, well look, think of my, you know, this month I'm making a trip to Moscow, to Tokyo, Helsinki, London, and he mentioned 10 cities he was going to visit, playing with what? 3 other people, 1 other person, sometimes with a symphony orchestra. Think of that cartography of connections that this person, if he's going to connect with 3 others and do it with very few rehearsal hours, that's what he meant. And the third thing was giving it away means teaching, giving it away. Boy, I think that was memorable.
You talk about the importance of finding talent, that a leader finds talent for a great group. But then you said sometimes talented people find you. They smell out places that are full of promise and energy, the places where the future is being made. The gifted often catch the zeitgeist and ride it to a common shore. Certain schools and academic departments are lodestones for talent. How do they get to be that?
If you, excuse me, if you notice how Silicon Valley happened, and by the way, a footnote on that is really fascinating to me now because, as we may have discussed, Marty, I think the key word in the future is going to be urbanization, not just globalization, because more and more, Mayor Bloomberg just put in his budget $100 million and 10 acres of Roosevelt Island to create a Silicon Valley in New York City. Now, what I'm getting at here is when Alan Kay, one of the people in PARC, one of the co-creators of the original GUI, first laptop computer, drifted toward others, and he went to Utah at first, where there was a group in Salt Lake, and then drifted where others were going who were interested in computers. I was at MIT when that was, you could see people coming there from AT&T, because you know that was where the early work in the computers were going on. And then they began drifting toward places like Caltech, toward Stanford. And what Bloomberg was getting at was that people don't go to NYU to get engineers and technically trained people. Yet, I want it to be like that. So, first of all, there's a drift toward a new idea, and and some people spot it. They just move that way. So that's why so many of them are college dropouts, because they felt I could learn more if I go to this lab out there. Something like that is part of it. And then there is the great man coming into it. The leader of the group has a research stream, and he's known, like, you never heard of the J.C.R. Licklider, have you? No, but he was at MIT. He was he was the real co-founder, not Al Gore, of the internet. J.C.R. Licklider. But people who read the magazines, drifted toward MIT because of Licklider. Not the great man. No one's ever heard of Licklider, except he is in the book. And it's being drawn by an idea, and oh, there's a guy I can work with who sees the future as I see it, or maybe he'll help me see it. I think there are two draws. And
do you smell that zeitgeist here somewhere at USC?
Yeah, not sure. I'm not sure. I think there may be things. USC has become, to me, a more complex thing than it was when I moved here in 1980. In 1980, no kidding, when I would be with other people, they would say, oh, there's this guy in poli-sci you should get to know. And there were a few people that could, but there was no Nobel laureate at the time. There was no, but now we may have. I honestly, I would love it. I think we have some promising, I'll just talk from my department at Marshall School. It's called Management and Organization Department. And I see one or two people who are young, and in both cases, they're the only two that have become full tenured professor that we hired. And I can see 2 or 3 or 4 of these younger faculty who I think have that possibility of being the draw, because they're into new and exciting stuff.
Homegrown, not stars
Homegrown.
recruited.
Right. That's the ones we have to nourish, too.
Warren told me before we came up here that he had made a little summary of some of the takeaways of great groups. And I thought it would be great if we could hear that list. Is it 7?
Okay, it's 7. Yeah. I did this because I'm not very good, and Marty knows this, when I used to do a lot of speaking. I was on a speaking circuit for many years, stopped flying about 3 years ago, and great relief, actually, but some regrets, too. But when in my speakers bureau said, okay, Warren, the client would like to know what your deliverables are. My stomach would churn. I don't do deliverables, I said. So I try hard to overcompensate about this, and that's why PowerPoint for me is very useful. I mean, just the outline of where I'm going. So let me look. Okay, let me do it quickly. Mm-hmm. I mentioned Bob Zemeckis earlier. We're all making the same movie. Shared vision is the takeaway. Shared vision. Sounds so damned naive. We were all making. We were all making the same movie. Well, it sounds like it's loaded with meaning. Shared. We're all making Forrest Gump. Second, skin in the game. I'll try to look up the origin of that phrase this morning, Marty. Buffett used it once, and he's often given the skin in the game. You got it. I mean, it's a gambling term, I guess. Skin in the game means anteing up beforehand, investing in it. What's your investment? I guess that's the second thing. Skin in the game. Let's call it investment, Warren Buffett. He said it. Skin in the game, meaning he only bets. Continues to on the market where he's really invested. That's what he relies on. That they continue. He's got skin in the game. 3. That's 2. 3. I mentioned earlier. I used Dr. Samplin. When we work on a course, we know we need each other to do this course, and this course has really been fun for 14 years. And there's at least one student, at least one spotted here. Hi, Warren. And Chris, who took it 12 years ago, Chris? 11. Still look young to me, I don't know. Okay, so you couldn't do without the other. Watson and Crick. They were at the periphery of their own disciplines. They couldn't have done it without each other. Okay, 4, product. I mentioned earlier, the book. A product. Something got through the door. Terrible. 5, abandon your own ego to the talents of others. Yeah. Some article I read recently, it's in this book. The Hollywood syndrome is not abandoning your ego to the talents of others. That's what...
Not abandoning your ego.
Well, the Hollywood syndrome is, I know what's best for everybody. I'm the brightest guy, don't question me in the room. That's not what I think brings out. It's abandoning your ego to the talents of others. It's not, I'm the star. And I know more terrifically bright CEOs have failed just on that one thing. They have to continue to believe. Larry Summers is a fairly good example of university presidents who could not do it. Marty, you know too well what I'm talking about. You know Larry. And bright as they come. But he has that, I'm the brightest guy in the group. But the trouble is he is incredibly bright. But he's got to learn. And then 6, as I mentioned earlier, trust, and 7 is diversity. But I have an arrow here. The talented leaders who I think fail most often is when they don't allow and create the platform for others to do the dancing and singing. That's the platform of great collaborative leaders. And it's real hard, especially if you happen to be a guy like Larry Summers, who happens to be the nephew of 2 Nobel laureates in economics and got tenure, the earliest of anybody at York University. I think he was 28, which is the youngest ever given tenure to Dr. Summers.
I'm going to wrap up with a comment that you made when you were writing the introduction to the Essential Bennis, looking through all of these pieces. You said something I was very struck by. You said, "I am increasingly aware how crucial rhetoric and other performing arts are in making a compelling leader, good or bad."
Yeah. I think it's something, I'm glad I said it, and in fact there is a piece in that book that called Leadership as a Performing Art. And I still haven't nuanced it or got the full subtlety of what that means, because does it mean you're just acting? Like right now, I'm on. I'm on in the sense that I'm trying to do my best to have a successful interview with Marty. So I'm really in a role that I'm not like when I'm at home. But yet, if my kids were here, if Grace were here, and Mark, there are a lot of people who really know me here, who've been friends with me. I don't think I'm a different person exactly. I'm trying to get those eyes. But, I mean, I'm still Warren Bennis, I hope. But yet, but I'm not, I mean, I know I go on sometimes like this. So I don't know how to distinguish between now being on. I'm in public doing a performance. This is what it is. It's a performance, isn't it? And yet, so I'm not the way I am a lot of the time, and I'm trying to remember to be pithy and short in my responses, which I don't always do, but it's different. And yet I don't feel phony. So I don't know how to go beyond that. But I do know that leaders have to be aware of Queen Elizabeth I. When she addressed the Armada, she knew what she was doing. She put on the most fascinating and heavy kind of royal garment that could shine and to talk to the Armada. I mean, she was aware of performance. So was Alexander the Great. So was, I think Caesar clearly was aware of his impression. He did change the toga before he went on. No, I'm not joking. I mean, it's not just in the play, but in Plutarch's history of Caesar, he talks about being very aware of the dress he was wearing. Why? Because part of performance is putting on, as Olivier says, you don't have to be a great actor. If you want to do Cyrano, you just get a fake nose. Without the fake nose, without the costume, I cannot do it. No kidding. He wasn't talking about Alls from Within, the Strasbourg field of theater, the acting. Mm. No, just get the right. When I became it's in another book. When I became a second lieutenant in the infantry with a gold bar, it made the role, the costume, the officer's uniform, actually made me be like what the expectations are of a second lieutenant leading an infantry platoon. Now, I hope I'm not explained it fully, because I don't get it fully, the difference between being on, and yet not being incongruent, not being
being inauthentic.
Yes.
Do you think Steve Jobs knew he was playing Steve Jobs?
I doubt it. I don't know. It's interesting, because I wish I knew. I didn't read the recent biography of him. How reflective, I think, when I say I don't know, my first response was, I don't think he was. My second response is, I better read
Walter Isaacson.
The new biography by
Walter Isaacson.
Yeah, Walter Isaacson. Yeah. I think it's a question I puzzle over. I asked Glenn Close, by the way, to write a response in The Essential Bennis. And her response to that was really, I think, worth a look at,
Well, earlier you said that you noted that there are no Academy Awards for ensemble performances. We were just talking about Warren Bennis as a performer, and I hope you will take it the right way that I believe you deserve from this room your own Academy Award for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Warren.
Thank you all. Thank you.